And I think the experts will tell you it's not an avian dinosaur, it's a bird. God designed the birds, God designed the reptiles, God designed the mammals, and God did a wonderful job. Quit trying to mix them up. Thank you.
Okay, it's not 400 billion.
Million. You said million.
Well, we believe, mainline evolutionists believe that the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. But if you're interested in how the epistemology or how we think we know what we know on that, it's primarily through radioactive dating. And how long am I supposed to take on each reply? Just quick, but okay. Let me just cut to the chase here about radioactive dating. Radioactive dating is a technique which is fraught with peril. It's difficult to do. It's full of many assumptions. There have been a huge number of mistakes made with it. I still believe that it is, when properly used, an essentially trustworthy technique. And here's the key thing about radioactive dating in creation-evolution debates. When you're trying to determine if a measuring instrument is valid, like let's say a ruler, okay, we've all measured the lengths of things with rulers. Okay, now has anybody here, like me, I'm embarrassed to admit this, once I measured something with a ruler, and here I have a PhD in science, and I was measuring something with a ruler, and to my horror, I discovered that I was mismeasuring it. I didn't have it on the 0 mark, and I actually made a mistake, okay? Here's someone with a PhD misuses a ruler. And I'm sure that many people here, children, drunkards, many people throughout history have failed to use a ruler properly. So the key point here about radioactive dating is that if you're trying to determine whether a measuring instrument is valid or not, you cannot just look at the mistakes that have been made. This is what creationists always do. They point out dozens of mistakes that have been made with ludicrous results. But what you need to do is you need to show cases where the instrument was used properly. And I have right there an awesome example of radioactive dating being used properly that I think in a single stroke can verify the efficacy of it. Okay, you're talking about what would be called prebiotic evolution. How did the first cells get here? Prebiotic evolution is by far the most poorly understood thing in all of evolutionary theory. It's so poorly understood, in fact, that I actually tell my students that you could have intellectual integrity to simply say that the first cells were specially created by God. And I actively entertain that as a possibility. And I'm not just saying that, I really truly entertain that as a possibility. I still think you give us about 25 years and I think we'll solve that problem. The one thing that I can say empirically about it is that, okay, you have to have DNA to make proteins, but the proteins are necessary. DNA polymerase is necessary to make DNA. So you need something that can both carry genetic information and act as an enzyme. And we have discovered such a thing. It's RNA, ribonucleic acid. RNA has been shown over and over in about 4 or 5 major cases to be able to function as an enzyme. For example, in the ribosome, the huge assembly that synthesizes proteins, it's been proven that the active site in that assembly, the part where amino acids are actually being placed into proteins, the active site is RNA. The closest protein is 18 angstroms away, which is light years away in biochemistry. So it by no means comes close to solving the entire problem, but RNA is a huge step toward solving this chicken and egg problem, because RNA can do both.
Yeah, I would say they're very far from a solution in spite of enormous federal tax dollars spent to try to solve this problem, because it's unsolvable. The fact of the matter is they're just so complex. I think you could point out that most of the books in the library around here are based on the same 26 letters of the alphabet. So if I go through a book by Shakespeare and a book by somebody else and find out, Shakespeare uses the letter E, 18% of the time, and some other author uses the letter E 18% of the time. Does that prove a similarity? Well, yeah, that proves that's how often you use the letter E. Does that prove the books are related? No. I think all of the research being done on proteins of different creatures showing the similarities is evidence for common designer. And I resent that the textbooks in your town, and most towns, only present the kids with one view. They show the kids the evidence, the similarities of DNA, and say, see, this is proof of a common ancestor. No. That's too complex. It doesn't change. It's proof of a common designer, that's all. The RNA, DNA, chicken and egg problem is a very serious problem. And even if they could imagine a scenario how it could happen, again, you're back to imagination, not science. One student said to me, he said, what are you going to say if scientists make life in the laboratory? I said, well, I guess that's going to prove it takes intelligence to make life, isn't it? That's what it's going to prove. The purpose of tonight's debate was to discuss, is there evidence for evolution? I'm not asking the taxpayers to pay for my theory to be taught in the schools. If I was, the burden of proof would be on me. Since he's asking the taxpayers to pay for his religion to be taught, then the burden of proof's on him. Where's the evidence? I don't think we saw any tonight. So you have nothing to be upset about, except that I think we did, the purpose of the debate was fulfilled. We're supposed to see, is there evidence for evolution? That was the purpose of the debate. We could debate the evidence for creation, I think, but that's like saying, we need to light a candle to see the sun. The evidence for creation is all around us. It is, the evidence for creation is a very powerful evidence, is the absolute impossibility of the contrary. In logic, if I said, I believe a lake out there is only got water for the top 5 feet, the rest of it's air under the water. That is logically impossible. Water is heavier than air, so it falls. For someone to say a complex machine like a watch happened by chance, that is logically impossible. Even though I've never seen the designer of this watch, I believe he exists, because it's impossible for there not to be a designer. When you see a house, there must be a builder. When you see a creation, there must be a creator. So the evidence for the creator is in the creation. The Bible says in Romans chapter 1, people are willingly ignorant. They don't want to see the creator, and God gives them up to their own crazy beliefs. It'd be tragic if God has given up on you. I hope he hasn't yet. I suggest you read Romans chapter 1 carefully, okay?
I would just like to try to make what I think is a hugely important point about evidence. I see tons of evidence for creationism. I see 1,000 cases right here in front of me. Birds, atoms, the strong nuclear force. It's all evidence for creation. But I can also explain the origins of things through a theory that I've attempted to explain tonight. So the point here that I think people tend to forget is that a given empirical fact, such as the existence of a marvelously constructed human, can be evidence for two completely opposed things at the same time.
I think the effort should be put into getting lies out of the textbooks. Any textbook that teaches that the embryo has gill slits, the page ought to be torn out. Okay, it's not true. If they teach the whale has a vestigial pelvis, that page ought to be torn out. It's not true. If they teach about the so-called cavemen, whether it be Lucy or you name it, watch my video number 3 or number 2. I cover all those. Or there's a book called Bones of Contention dealing with the Neanderthals.